series of videos that I'll be making on this subject. I will be making more, but I thought it'd be good to let you guys know where I'm coming from and why I'm making things, and why I think they're important. I have prepared a script, so as allow me to order my thoughts all the more concisely. I will be reading from it from time to time. Please enjoy.
Alright, so before we begin here, there's something I believe that's important to establish before entering the religious debate, and that's the answering of two vitally important questions. Why is this so important to me, and why should you care? Those are really good questions, and if you'll let me, I'd like to try answering them. So firstly, I consider this important because I think that there's a higher cost to believing than most people even realize. There are many who have trusted in their God for help or guidance instead of seeking reality-based solutions. People have unnecessarily fought, killed, and died for their belief in their God. Far too many have died because they or their parents chose prayer instead of medicine. Like Jehovah's Witnesses would rather let their children die than to allow blood transfusion. Swords, bullets, poison, and disease have killed many who thought they were protected by their God. Even without these more dramatic effects, believers often devote significant time and energy and money to worshiping their God. This could, I believe, have been properly invested in worthwhile developmental pursuits, both for the individual and for humanity as a whole. This probably explains why the least religious nations have been the most advanced nations on Earth and vice versa. Religious belief has real expenses that can be large and destructive to the individual and to the world at large, like Islamic terrorism or the Crusades. They sincerely believed they are doing God's will by killing fellow human beings. Additionally, belief in a God, and the often resultant ideas of divine punishment and reward, far too often make people willing to accept inequalities in this life without trying to make things better for themselves. Low-paid factory workers, even slaves, were taught that their rewards were in the afterlife, so they should be meek and obedient in this life to ensure their heavenly rewards. Even the factory and slave owners could think that they were part of their God's divine plan, and thus deserved their earthly rewards. Life is full of unfairness, and those whom that unfairness benefits, well, I guess that was just God's plan. God provided for them. God blessed them. And if life's unfairness happens to give you the short end of the stick, well, that's just God. That's just God testing you. Don't complain. Now, some of you might ask, isn't it better to believe in case you're wrong? What about Pascal's Wager? And I'd like to address those questions here, and I have a few points you might be interested in. Pascal's Wager states that God can't be proved, but if God exists, the believer gains everything in going to heaven, and the unbeliever loses everything in going to hell. If God doesn't exist, the believer loses nothing, and the unbeliever gains nothing. There is therefore everything to gain and nothing to lose by believing in God. And I'll admit right off the bat here, I used to use this one myself back when I was a Christian. It's a fairly popular argument, and widely regarded as one of the stronger arguments for believing in the Christian God. However, respectfully, the wager does have several faults. The biggest problem is that it's not a proof of any God's existence, It is an argument for believing. It is purely a method of extorting the gullible through the fear of hell. Nothing more than a scare tactic that any religion could use to generate followers. Another problem with Pascal's Wager is that it wrongly assumes that the bet is only for non-existence versus existence of the Christian God. Since the odds of Islamic, Christian, Jewish, or Hindu gods coexisting as almighty are 0, the wager creates a false dilemma. It is not just no God versus one God. The wager can be applied to any number of gods. Additionally, it also fails to denote exactly which god it refers to. Pascal's Wager could be applied to any god that offers rewards and punishments. Taken to the extreme, the following wager would necessitate betting on the god with the worst hell, so it could be avoided. It's impossible to know which gods to worship and which, perhaps jealous gods, to spurn. I doubt if many Christians would convert to Islam if the wager were presented by a Muslim who told them that Muslim hell was worse than Christian hell, and Muslim heaven was better than Christian heaven. And I hope that the God chosen doesn't mind people believing in him for explicitly selfish reasons, because the fear of hell and the promise of heaven don't sound like the holiest of holy reasons to turn to God. The last problem with Pascal's Wager is that it completely ignores and even denigrates intellectual integrity and honesty. The wager assumes people can believe something just because they want to. As an example, let's talk about belief in Santa Claus. Don't we have more respect for a child who figures out Santa doesn't exist and says so, rather than continuing to lie so that he can get more presents? It's a sign of growing integrity and maturity in children to stop believing in Santa. Similarly, adults can give up their belief in a God when they realize that there's no real evidence for their God. Christians can quit being children of God and become more nuanced. The loss of intellectual integrity and honesty engendered by Pascal's Wager gives some insight into how apparently rational people can behave so irrationally. By accepting the wager, they have, perhaps implicitly, given up these important traits. But what drives them to be so irrational? What is at the heart of the issue? Well, I think that many people continue to believe in a God because it gives them comfort, not because a God actually exists. It's an emotional response. It gives them feelings of structure and meaning in their lives. It makes them feel more connected. It helps remove the fear of death and non-existence that we experience after death. Belief in a God also helps remove people's fear of hell that's been pounded into their minds from childhood. Additionally, it helps make the world a lot more black and white, less confusing, and easier to deal with. But is this any actual proof of the existence of God? Is comfort a good indicator of the truth of external reality? I don't think that it is, any more than the reality that astrology is not true simply because people find comfort in it. The universe does not owe us comfort and meaning. We create them ourselves.
But can't you see how happy we all are? You can't beat that. You'll never have this joy without God in your life.
The fact that a believer believes he is happier than an atheist is no more to the point than a drunken man who believes he is happier than a sober one. The credulity of happiness is of a cheap and dangerous quality. Religions are like feel-good drugs. I think that addicts will do or think almost anything to continue getting their fix, their comfort. Some people eventually see that Freedom from religious addiction is an intellectually and emotionally healthy change, although withdrawal can be painful. And while this may not seem plausible to someone currently involved in organized religion, there are many testimonials and articles that would back this claim up, including my own. So to answer the title, God is not really what I find important here. It's the cost of believing that is. Pascal's wager is wrong. You do lose something in believing. There is a real cost attached to religious belief. And I don't want people to live under those costs. And that is why God is so important to an atheist. It's because you are important to an atheist. You're important to me. I want to thank you all for listening. That is all the time we have for the evening. Good night, and may joy be with you all.